On this episode of China Uncensored, Taiwan's Sunflower Revolution. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. So, word of advice. When you have 10,000 students peacefully protesting because of concerns the government may be making decisions that will erode human rights and democracy, what the government should not do is turn the police on them and blast them with water cannons. That kind of sends a message they're right to be worried. That was Taiwan early Monday morning. At 8 p.m. the night before, hundreds of student protesters occupied the Executive Yuan, the headquarters of the executive branch of the Taiwanese government. Taiwanese Premier Ying-Jeou ordered the police in, and as you can see here, they weren't too keen on moving. Considering a water cannon can blind you, those kids are pretty tough. According to Taiwan's Central News Agency, at least 137 were injured. That includes protesters, police, and journalists, though most with minor injuries. At least 58 were arrested. The students' occupation of the Executive Yuan was sparked by a speech earlier in the day by Taiwanese President Ying-Jeou. Since March 18th, protesters, at one point numbering 10,000, have been staging a sit-in at Taiwan's legislative building, the Legislative Yuan. They've been protesting the Trade and Services Agreement, an agreement that will further open up investment in Taiwan by China. Now, what's so bad about that? Well, the deal was snuck through by the governing Kuomintang party without any bipartisan discussion. And since China considers Taiwan not an independent country, but a breakaway province and has vowed to reclaim it by force if necessary, some people have this crazy idea that China might be some kind of threat to Taiwan, and major economic policies involving China should be handled with maybe some caution. So, in response to the sit-in and the students' demonstrators' fairly legitimate questions, Ying-Jeou chose to criticize the protesters instead. Yeah, people being able to protest shady deals made by the government without public awareness, I'm pretty sure that is the kind of democracy you want. Actually, Ma, I think what you're talking about, where the government can do what it wants and people aren't allowed to complain, I'm pretty sure that's not a democracy. Those comments are what sparked the protesters to extend their sit-in on Sunday night from the legislative building to the nearby executive building. Apparently, they felt like the government wasn't listening to them for some reason. Now, KMT-sponsored media have criticized the students for their violent and illegal conduct. These anarchist students have chosen for themselves the name and image of the sinister sunflower to represent their nefarious goals. Clearly, these students are way more of a threat to Taiwan than the Chinese regime's 1,600 missiles they have pointed at the island. So, what is the deal between China and Taiwan? For the whole story, check out my episode, Taiwan versus China, the One China Policy, but here's the Cliff Notes version. The KMT used to rule in China until they were overthrown by the communists in 1949 and fled across the Taiwan Strait. And ever since, the cornerstone of Beijing's policy towards cross-strait relations has been to destroy Taiwan. Reunify Taiwan with mainland China. Taiwan nowadays is a multi-party democracy, with the two main parties being the KMT and the Democratic Progressive Party. So anytime the Chinese Communist Party insists that Chinese people just aren't ready for democracy, Taiwan is there to be like, hello. Now, originally both the KMT and the DPP had strong stances against the Chinese Communist Party, well, with that whole "we will invade you" stance of theirs. But the Communist Party has been slowly wooing the KMT, which is an easier target than the DPP, since the KMT has always favored reunification with China, albeit not under the Communist Party. Since KMT leader Ying-Jeou was elected in 2008 and re-elected in 2012, he's brought Taiwan and China closer than ever. Trade has increased, tourism is up, and as a result, a lot of new money has been flowing into Taiwan. In February, Taiwan and China hosted high-level talks that represented the first government-to-government contact since the KMT fled to Taiwan in 1949. So why wouldn't a new trade deal that allows more cross-strait investment be a bad thing? Well, remember, throughout all of this, China has never once gone back on their vow to retake Taiwan. Of course, they can't actually invade because if they did, the United States is bound by a congressional act to help Taiwan, and as I pointed out in my episode, Is China a Nuclear Threat?, China's People's Liberation Army isn't actually necessarily well trained enough to even launch an invasion. But China can use its economic power to slowly gain influence in Taiwan. That's basically what's been happening in Hong Kong. I've reported a lot recently about how communist authorities have been slowly eroding freedoms supposedly guaranteed in Hong Kong that are unthinkable in mainland China. And so when the Taiwanese government pushes forward this new trade deal with China so secretively that the Sunflower Student Movement has taken to calling it a black box, people are legitimately a bit concerned. Now, the problem with this trade pact is it's seductive. In the short term, it's a good thing. It will bring in money, create jobs, though some think at the expense of smaller companies in Taiwan. It won't allow China to manipulate prices because they're already doing that without the trade pact. President Ma says it's vital to maintain Taiwan's competitive edge in the international market, and if they go back on the agreement, it will damage their credibility as a trading partner. But in the end, Taiwan's skilled workers and businessmen will be lured to China, and businesses will be owned and controlled by mainland interests. And those are only the consequences if you assume China is a country ruled by law that doesn't have some ulterior master plan to retake Taiwan. Otherwise, things could be worse. But the protesters are having an impact. Though they've been kicked out of the executive building, they're still occupying the legislature. And the government is starting to listen. The KMT has now agreed to review the trade pact one clause at a time with the DPP at the next reading. As for Ying-Jeou, he's finally agreed to meet face-to-face with the protesters after saying that he wouldn't do so earlier. So, as I see it, Hong Kong and Taiwan are in very similar situations. Later this year, the potentially massive Occupy Central will be held in central Hong Kong to protest encroachment from the Chinese Communist Party. I think the only hope for both Taiwan and Hong Kong is if the people of both places keep speaking out against the Communist Party's attempt to influence their governments. Otherwise, in the next 10, 15 years, who knows what Hong Kong and Taiwan will look like. What are your thoughts? Leave your comments below and check out the China Uncensored Facebook page for more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.